while we're doing that, does anybody, just to start off, does anybody have a question they want to, before we get to some of the ones that were sent in? Question or comment?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I looked this up in the CDC recently to find out what, they're still if they're still defining close contact as 15 cumulative minutes in a 24-hour period, and it seems that they are. And I was just curious because you just keep hearing that the Delta variant is more contagious. So I didn't know, I don't know if you have any comments about that. It's
Sure.
more contagious, but yet it's still, considered 15 cumulative minutes.
Sure. So the specific guidelines a little bit vary in the way they're implemented in different settings, in schools, whether people need to quarantine or not. In general, the basic guidelines, close contact, 15 minutes or more, I would think of that as basically being more or less unchanged. The current, most of the infections right now throughout the United States and probably throughout the world in most areas are the Delta variant. And they encompass, a very major majority, and that is a much more infectious variant, and it's also less responsive to the vaccine if the vaccine has not been properly supported, meaning if you've had your vaccination currently and your immune status is good, it's very effective. But because of the increased infectiousness of this variant, once you start to lose your immunity, that variant has an upper edge and becomes much more dangerous. So it is much more infectious, but if you're properly vaccinated and boosted, then you really have very good protection against the Delta variant.
Thank you.
I have a question, and I don't know if this was a question put in. I just seen recent things on TV about the COVID-19 pill. Pfizer's coming out with something, so I was wondering what you know about it.
Yeah, so there are a couple of manufacturers that have submitted for approval for an oral, it's not a vaccine, but for an oral pill that has shown very good effectiveness in preventing hospitalizations and serious outcomes. So that is something that is going to be in the armamentarium probably in the near future, assuming it's approved. It's not in any way meant to replace the vaccine, and it's really important for people to realize that. It's not like, oh, well, now there's a pill, I don't need to get vaccinated. It's really meant for example, for people that may get vaccinated, but maybe they have a weakened immune system and they don't really build up antibody titers, or people who can't get vaccinated. One of the things I believe they're going to be doing for my discussions with some people I know in pharma is, we think of the United States, but there are many parts of the world that don't have the luxury of the type of healthcare system we have. And if you go to other countries or third world countries or many parts of the world, trying to implement vaccines, is very, very difficult. So I believe a number of these companies are going to be providing this at nominal cost, so to speak, to other countries. So it's not in any way meant to replace the vaccine, but it is something that will be really important as we move forward.
Great questions. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Greenberg, another question that we got ahead of time. Are death and hospitalization rates getting better or worse?
Sure. So that, again, complicated question, a lot depends on the locale where you are. In many countries, it's getting worse. In some countries, it's staying the same. In the United States, it really depends where you are. There are parts of the country where it's absolutely horrendous. And then there are parts of the country like where we are in counties where it's better. But I think locally, it's clearly better than it was during the bad times in the pandemic earlier on, but we've seen very significant increases in the rates of infection and in some cases hospitalization. I think many of you may know the ping pong game going back and forth with the mask mandates in Montgomery County. But, you know, if you look at the infection rates where, you know, I believe in this at least a substantial range. And so I think the rates overall are increasing again. They're not where they were, you know, a month or two ago. And we've not yet even approached the hardest time, which is going to be the winter time when everybody is kind of forced into confined areas. So, and remember, we're at a point now, if you think when you got your vaccine, we're at a point now where many people's immune status from the vaccine is starting to wane. So unfortunately, that is occurring at the same time that we have 95% of the infections coming from the Delta virus variant, and at the same time we're going into winter. So we know that if you got your vaccine 6 months ago, your protection really is decreased significantly, and we're also going to be indoors. So this is a very kind of dangerous time kind of in the next couple of months. So I think that the real answer is it's kind of things are, you know, getting worse again.
Can I just add to Dr. Greenberg's comments?
Welcome, Fair Boys.
I have been back here, quiet. So just to augment what Dr. Greenberg shared, I do follow the national numbers, especially through the New York Times coronavirus tracker. Just to share some numbers with you guys, a couple of months ago, we were something like about 2,500 deaths a day from coronavirus. And our infection numbers were quite astronomically high. We did go through a period where it started declining, and I'm talking about trends. So like Dr. Greenberg were mentioning, it is very geographic, and it has to do with local policies and so on and so forth, and people's acceptance of vaccine and so forth. But if we were to look at it on a national basis, that number has now gone down, and I'm talking mortality, the deaths from official deaths reported from coronavirus is down to a little over 1,000 now per day. So we have had a substantial decline on the average number of deaths. However, when we look at the daily numbers being reported, and I'm just going to tell you my data from this morning, which reflects yesterday's data. Yesterday, over 1,400 people were reported as mortality from COVID, even though our average number is about 1,000, but our mortality has gone up. And with the Delta, and again, just like Dr. Greenberg mentioned, as we're approaching that 6-month mark, and we're pretty much into the 6 to 8 months from the early folks who got it, including many of us, that immunity is waning, and it's about risk management. So we should expect the rates to go up, and this thing's pretty contagious. So whatever we can do, we need to do. But it's invisible. There's no way we can fully control it, but just take the right precautions. And one other thing, if I may, on the oral therapies, the two companies that are expected to get their EUAs approved, Pfizer and Merck, both they seem to be going for the 3 to 5 day or 7 day courses. We'll see what comes out of the EUA. So it's going to be more like a Tamiflu type approach. You know, if people have it, they're going to get it. And one thought here is that as everyone knows, one option we have right now is if somebody is exposed or has an active infection, is the monoclonal antibodies. So those, a few options there, IV and recently subcutaneous, which has made it a little bit more practical. It's for 2.5 cc injections in the abdominal area that could be done at home, even in the parking lots in various places, but it still requires a bunch of logistics to make that happen. This oral therapy may very well take over and be able to at least get to patients a little faster than the monoclonal antibodies in some cases can. And the good news is that both Pfizer and Merck, as we may have all heard on the news, have agreed to provide this to the rest of the world at a very low cost. So we can manage the pandemic where it's coming from. Really, it could be coming from anywhere in the world, not just here in the United States. I'm going to stay quiet now. Thank you.
No, thank you for adding that. Those were extremely true and important comments. And I'm glad you mentioned the part about the monoclonals. You know, the science can get a little complicated, but on a practical level, you know, there is the vaccine, there is the booster. And then as you pointed out, there's this medication that requires IV, you know, administration, and it's effective, but it just doesn't happen in reality. So to make it on a practical level, let's say you're a direct support professional, you've gotten your vaccine, or maybe you didn't get a vaccine, or you didn't get your booster and you're exposed and now you kind of become symptomatic, you have fever and so forth, you would be a candidate to get this IV therapy. But people just don't do it. It just doesn't happen. But there will now be this pill. So, you know, if you got your vaccine and you did get sick, they'd probably give you, you know, like taking an antibiotic, and it's extremely effective. So it is going to be a really important thing moving forward. So thank you for making that point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fariborz. Thank you, Dr. Greenberg. Okay, lots of questions here, so I'm gonna read on, but if anyone else has something they'd like to ask or a question, please let us know. Okay, so I've got one in the chat.
Can we unmute?
Kelly.
Could we? I think we have time. Could we unmute and let Kelly ask directly if it's in the chat?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, Dr. Greenberg, I wanted to know, does the booster have to be the same brand as the original vaccine that we received?
That's a great question. Really good question. So the CDC recommendations, again, unless they've changed it, and sometimes I've been on some of these talks where I'm speaking and then they literally change them, but the recommendation is that it be the same, but it's fully acceptable if it's not the same, if you're not able to get the same, to mix and match. So they kind of basically came out and said, you know, when you can get the same one, that's great, but if you can't, that's okay too. So I would basically say, just like with the initial one, with the initial vaccine, the important thing is getting it. I wouldn't worry too much about which one you get. Most people tend to stay with the one that they got, is my experience, both because that's a recommendation and just people feel comfortable with that. So yeah, to answer your question, stay with the one you got, but if you need to get the other one, no problem, totally fine. Great.
And one thing I'll add, since we're kind of ping-ponging this stuff, is just if you choose to, if anybody chooses to switch up, based on the approvals of these vaccines, if someone's getting a booster for Moderna, they would be getting half dose of the regular, and Pfizer booster is the full dose. So that's, you know, I'm not gonna, I don't have the ability to translate that into exactly what that means in terms of how your body is gonna respond and what kind of antibody levels it's gonna build. And frankly, even how to interpret some of those antibody levels. It just takes a little bit more time for us to scientifically be able to draw a good correlation. But both of those mRNA vaccines are very, very effective. We know about that. I think that one question that comes up often is folks who got Johnson & Johnson. And they also ask, you know, which direction they should go. We don't tend to tell people what to do. People, you know, we just share the information with them as far as which direction they want to go. But all I can say is that the CDC recommendation when it comes to mRNA vaccines was a 6-month post your second dose. But when it came to Johnson & Johnson, they said 2 months after your second dose. So for whatever that's worth, If you happen, or if anybody happened to be a Johnson & Johnson recipient, you have a choice of going in any one of those directions.
Awesome, thank you. That's very helpful information. I'm gonna take your lead, Dr. Greenberg, and call out Danielle here, who's on the call today. She put a very good question into our chat. Danielle, do you want to share your question?
You're muted.
I think you're muted, Danielle. Probably in the bottom. There you go. Oh, no. Still muted or low volume.
We can read it for you. Let's see here. I have to get my booster and my flu shot. Which one should I take first? And is there a waiting period between the shots?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And again, I always say ask your physician because it's possible for an individual, it's different. But in general, most people and most pharmacies will allow you to get both together actually on the same day. You can get them both together. So it really depends upon what you want to do. Now, are you talking about your initial vaccine or are you talking about the booster?
The booster.
The booster. So you know, it's a personal decision. If you were not going to get them together, it's really a personal decision. I personally myself would get the booster first and the flu shot second, but to the best of my knowledge, unless they've changed the guidelines or there's something unique, you can actually get the two of them together. And perhaps, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to pronounce your name. Is it Fariborz?
Fariborz, right.
Yeah, you may want to weigh in too.
Sure. So you're absolutely correct. You can get them simultaneously. In fact, we have administered quite a few for some of our other group homes, partly because of logistics of making multiple clinics happen and getting people out. And also companies that are right now producing vaccines have already produced both flu shot and mRNA vaccines together for future seasons or future years. So which says basically an injection. So that just goes to say that it can be given together. But as Dr. Greenberg mentioned, every case is different. If your physician feels otherwise, or you want to wait a little bit, that's just fine. One other consideration is, unfortunately, when we administer vaccine, we do have to put a needle in your arm and get through that muscle somehow. And that will cause a bit of soreness in most cases. Sometimes getting both done at the same time in the same arm, at least will get you through it faster. You don't have to go through this whole process. And also some people like to get one in each arm. That just causes more pain. There's no real benefit in going to different arms. It still gets absorbed in your body. So personally, I got both at the same time. I got it over with, I took it, and I'm here talking to you, so.
And I'll give you the other side. So
yeah,
I got them about 3-4 days apart because if I did have some type of reaction, I wanted to know which one it was from.
Yeah.
And I also need to be able to use my arms on a daily basis. I didn't want one to be too sore. But the most important thing is that you get it. So what I kind of tell people when they ask on a practical level, if you're going to split it up and you're going to wind up just getting one and then you're going to delay and you're not going to really come back for the other one, just get them both, because both COVID and influenza can kill you. Okay, so you want to get both. It doesn't matter, whatever's easiest for you. You can do them together and knock it out, or you can spread it apart by however long you want.
Okay, wonderful. I was told to wait 2 weeks, and it worked out for me. I think I got my flu shot the first opportunity that I had. And, our clinic that we had on Friday just happened to be 2 weeks after. So it worked out well.
And I will tell you, the probably the reason for that. And again, you know, we do the best we can as healthcare professionals, but not everybody's always as up to date sometimes. With some of the original vaccines and some of the original CDC guidance going back, there was a point where there was kind of, you know, you should not get the vaccine within 2 weeks of another vaccine, and that's probably where that came from. So, yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, is Philip on the call? Philip, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? I can also read it. Let's see. If one has traveled out of state or outside of the country after taking the booster, what will be the advice upon return? In terms of, I'm not really sure here, but is that in terms of getting tested or, I don't know, Philip, do you want to add to your question?
So I will say that, you know, the recommendations change sometimes depending upon where you've traveled to. There are also recommendations from the CDC, and then there are individual state recommendations, and there are even company organizational recommendations. So I'm not going to try to answer that because I really don't know. There is frequently still
Well,
testing.
maybe we could, that's a good point. Maybe we can have Joan shed some light on what our policy is right now with international travel or out of state travel when it comes to being tested for someone who it sounds like is fully vaccinated.
Right, and I'm not muted, right? Okay. So yeah, our policy is if you're fully vaccinated, we want you to have a negative test before you return to work. That test taken no sooner than 5 days after you return to the US. That's for international travel. For domestic travel, we kind of say it depends on where you go. If you went to a really red zone, which I don't know, kind of everywhere is a red zone, but then it would, you know, may need to be tested. Fully vaccinated is still defined as 2 weeks following the second dose. So being boosted, you know, we haven't thrown boosters into the fully vaccinated definition. I don't know if the CDC will come out with a change on that at any point. So we're still going with the 2 weeks, you know, it has to be 2 weeks from the second dose or final dose if it was Johnson & Johnson.
And I think that's probably the most common general statement, because, you know, even when you have been vaccinated, you can contract it, and especially with international travel, depending where you are. So most organizations, most groups that I speak to are kind of taking that approach, especially if you're working with healthcare setting or congregate settings. You know, and the reason that you want to get tested ideally like 5 days is you can be positive, but if you've been, especially if you've been vaccinated, you may not build up enough virus in your system to really test positive. You know, sometimes people come back and they're like, well, why can't I get tested the next day? So there's frequently a period. Most people who test positive do so between days 3 and days 5. So I usually kind of advise day 5, but that's kind of, yep. So yeah, no, thanks, Joan.
Don't see any more questions in the chat, but before I go on and read questions that we received beforehand, does anyone want to unmute, turn on their camera, ask a question?
And go ahead.
Question.
What? Go
So I think Ernestina had a question.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I have a question. I was talking to someone who has not taken the vaccine. So I asked her why, and she told me that she had the COVID and she survived. So she's been told that the body has built natural antibodies, so she doesn't need to take the vaccine. How true is that, and what will be your advice to that person?
Sure. So that's not correct medically. There are two types of immunity that you can get. One is natural immunity, the way that that term is used, meaning you've had COVID, and the other is through the vaccination. And both of those give protection. They both give levels of antibodies in the bloodstream. Well, one thing to keep in mind is, sometimes you'll hear things like, oh, well, if you've had COVID, your antibody levels are higher. Very important to separate that. The whole premise behind getting the vaccine and staying safe, none of the science is really based upon the level of the antibodies. So we don't test your antibody level and say, oh, okay, you don't need the vaccine. That's not the way any of the studies were done. So there are people that can have higher levels of antibody and get sick and die. There are people that can have lower levels of antibody and be fine. So you can't use the antibody level, because I've had a number of DSPs ask me, and I've had good friends ask me, well, I'm not sure if I want to really get the booster. Can I just check my antibody titers and see what my levels are? And the answer is no. You can't really use that to help guide your decision making. And the CDC does not recommend using that. As for the other part, people who have contracted COVID get protection the same way people that get the vaccine are protected, but that wears off the same way that the vaccine does. And from the very beginning, the CDC recommendations always said that, if you've had COVID, you're protected, but you still should get the vaccine. So the answer is, think of having COVID in a way as having maybe had the vaccine. You still need a booster. And in this case, the booster, so the answer is you really do need to get vaccinated because you will not be protected. That will decrease over time, the protection, and you'll be at risk.
So I have a question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I have a question. It's more about, I don't know if people have seen, and recently there's been a fairly public figure who was recently had a positive COVID-19 case. And I think he said he was immunized by taking ivermectin, Ivermectin.
Ivermectin.
Thank you. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about
Sure.
that.
So, it's very difficult and understandable when the lay public doesn't know some of the medical facts, because that's not what all you guys do. But it's really troubling to me when you have a public figure, especially somebody like Ben Roethlisberger, a famous football player who millions of people look up to, who makes statements that are incorrect, inaccurate, and misleading, because that information gets out there. So he basically had COVID and portrayed that somehow he was protected, and when he was not. So he had COVID, but he's both at risk for contracting it again and at risk for giving it to other people. It's an individual decision whether you choose to get the vaccine or the booster. But think about this. Most of you who play football or have seen football, or American football at least, you have somebody who probably may potentially be infectious, and now he's huddling around with 10 other guys, talking in a little crowd, putting everybody at risk. So that's one issue. The ivermectin is something that made its way onto the media through a lot of misleading, incorrect YouTube, social media posting. Ivermectin is basically an antiviral or an agent that's used in the veterinary field. So if you're a horse, it's helpful for a number of things. If you're a human being, there's no scientific data that it's effective or should be used to treat or prevent COVID. I'm not going to tell you 100% that it doesn't work at all. It's just not something that's ever been studied or used. But there are many, many very vocal people on YouTube swearing that this thing works, and it does not. There are no studies showing that it's effective. And again, it's a veterinary medication. So if you hear that, that is totally misleading. There's no role for that. And there've been cases of, people going out and just getting this medicine and taking it and having really dangerous things happen. So good question, because that's in the media all the time.
And
Yeah,
one,
great.
and
Sorry, go ahead, Fariborz.
just to add to the ivermectin, the doses that supposedly would work would have to be very large doses, which will lead to toxicity. And the very same folks who put on these YouTubes and some people that use their own personal credibility as being real authorities and making these statements, probably also don't talk about so many hospital admissions as a result of secondary to taking ivermectin, that people got into there and got all kinds of neurotoxicities and all kinds of other problems. There's a reason why things go through the FDA approval process. They look at all kinds of things before they approve anything. And FDA put out a statement cautioning people not to use this. So we should all be very careful. I get this question from very educated people who are also, I'm surprised that they would contact me about ivermectin, but I've been very clear with them, don't even approach me with that stuff, because I would never, ever engage with anything like that. But what I'm saying is that it's not just the lay people who get affected by this. A lot of these posts are extremely believable. And even educated people see it and they send a clip and they say, what do you think of this thing? And anyway, just be very careful. We have proven scientific methods that we can manage this process. We should probably stick to those first.
Absolutely. I just wanted to say that that's why we're having this meeting today, so we can share and hear from people who have the facts. So really appreciate both of you being here today. Does anyone else have any questions?
Can I ask a question before we go on? Is there anybody in the group here, either themselves or through other direct support professionals, that can share that can explain or share a question about why somebody might not feel comfortable, whether it's you or another direct support professional you work with? A lot of the misinformation, a lot of the rumors, a lot of the just, lack of knowledge on certain things, it varies, many of the direct support professionals that take care of my son, a lot of them are from different parts of Africa. And the types of questions that evolve in those discussions are different than the types of questions that evolve with other individuals, which are different from. So I've learned a lot by talking with different groups of people. So I'm curious, can anybody share any resistance that either they have or a question they have, or what you've heard when you're working a shift with someone else? Well, I don't want to get this because that helps us answer in an educated way and give the information to the group to make good decisions with. So just ask anybody who may have anything to add to open their mic and just share. Any takers?
Okay, so Dr. Greenberg, I would like to share this.
Yes.
This is Kwasi.
Yes, Kwasi.
I know there is a friend who don't want to take this based on religious perception. He states that they said there is some kind of a chip in the vaccine that goes into your body, and it's a tracking system associated with what they call 666, whatever. Is there any chip in the vaccine?
Sure. So that's a really good question, and it's one that I've heard several times before, and also based on getting that question, was able to kind of go on YouTube and kind of find things that I could understand where it came from. There's absolutely nothing in the vaccine that is a chip, that is anything that would allow anybody to do anything with respect to tracking or anything. The only thing that is in the vaccine are proteins and the same thing that are in other vaccines, in essence. And in simple terms, you know, because I've had several DSPs ask me that, and what I've told them is, you know, many of the DSPs that I know, they come from, you know, countries where, you know, to come to the United States, you know, you need 97, you know, smallpox, yellow fever, dengue fever. You're vaccinated against everything under the sun. The stuff in these vaccines is really, in a general sense, no different than what's in those. There is no tracking device. There is nothing whatsoever. So that's 100%. So hopefully, you know, the key is to kind of feed that back to people in a way where they understand and are receptive to it. Otherwise, they just say, well, I don't believe you. It's misinformation that was put out on YouTube in a number of videos, and it just caught on. And part of the reason it caught on was because of mistrust in the whole system. So somebody kind of came up with this, well, we don't trust what they're doing. They put a tracker in, and, you know, absolutely, completely 1000% incorrect. But thank you for asking that question. Really important for me to be able to get that out there.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. Kim Turlington.
Yes.
So I have a lot of people that come to me and ask me, well, they're concerned that they just don't know what their bodies are being injected with. They're scared. They don't know, you know, all of a sudden within a year, they come up with a vaccination that of a COVID-19 that we've just never heard of. All of a sudden we have a vaccination that we just comes up out of the blue, and they just don't, they're scared to be injected with something they just don't really have no knowledge of.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So when I get that question, which I get a lot, I really try to tailor the answer to the person, because it depends on what so the first thing I ask them, are we talking about the booster, or are we talking about the initial vaccine?
The initial vaccine.
Okay. So what I try to explain to people is there's a list of ingredients that you can get, and I can provide it before, that shows you everything that is in each vaccine. I mean, like literally every single thing that's in the vaccine. So those are the only ingredients that are in the J&J vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, and you can read them, and it's clear what's there. So it's not like some black box mystery that's patented. You know exactly what's there. And I've gone through it and showed people, this is what's here. This is salt. This is a preservative. So you can show people exactly what's in it. The question of, well, how did they just come up with the vaccine? That's a little bit harder, but the way I try to explain that is a couple of ways. Although COVID-19 is something new, the general types of virus that it represents are families of viruses that have been around for a while, and we've dealt with them in other types of situations, avian flu. So they're a family of viruses that we're familiar with. And there have been many years of research going on about how to develop vaccines related to these types of viruses. We just never had the need to do it. So it's not like, oh, we see something brand new and now we're just starting from scratch. It's not like that. There's been a lot of research on these types of viruses for many years. And when this mutated and became infectious to people, we had the basic foundation of the house already there because we knew the science. What changed was, as opposed to something that takes 5 years to develop, we now had the government giving pharmacy research people unlimited funds, billions of dollars, whatever you need. You need $10 billion to develop it, do it. So they had people, I have friends who work in the pharma industry, they had unlimited resources. So they were able to basically take the science they had and just speed things up, because rather than have 10 people work on it, they had 1,000 people work on it. So the science is not particularly new. It was the development of the vaccine itself. And just by putting in huge amounts of money, they were able to develop it quickly. That's what I try to explain to people. It went through all the same processes that every other vaccine goes through. And, you know, the last thing I tell people is that question, it's a little more, you know, concerning maybe when they first came out with it, because even if you're, you know, a little skeptical, you're like, well, you know, maybe I don't believe everything they say. But we know now that there are millions, billions of people that have gotten the vaccine. There's no question that it's safe. So at this point, we've seen everything we're going to see in terms of problems. So we're so far along, so many millions, you know, hundreds of millions of people have gotten the vaccine. So that's how I try to explain it to people. And many people you can explain it to and they kind of get it. Other people just, it's not going to matter what you say. So, but that's kind of the key information, the way I look at it.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I can also add, we get the same challenges. There are a lot of clinics that we've been to just prior to the boosters, which we're now confronting people who actually want the boosters that are showing up. But we went through several months of folks who were hesitating or coming in and required a lot of conversation before they took the shot. One of the things that sometimes is helpful for that argument of, I don't know what I'm putting in my body, and it was developed very quickly, is to perhaps remind people of the polio crisis. And, you know, the polio was pretty serious, and it was really handicapping a lot of people, and it was really out of control. That vaccine was developed just as fast, if not faster. It was approved much faster than the mRNA vaccines that we're dealing with through the FDA and so forth. Literally, the data was submitted to the FDA, and that same day it was approved. And interestingly enough, the commentary about the polio vaccine was extremely similar to everything we're hearing about how people were saying that this vaccine they're going to kill people, they're going to, you know, eradicate population and so on and so forth. But today we don't see polio. We read about polio. We read about it in the textbooks, right? People have taken the vaccines, and a lot of people that say, I don't know what I'm putting in my body, for the most part, have all been vaccinated with all kinds of childhood vaccinations and everything else. They're just questioning this one particular vaccine. One approach I've taken with some of these people is basically to kind of remind them, we didn't ask, none of us asked for the pandemic, but it's here now, so we have to make some decisions. It's in front of us. So do I prefer to have the coronavirus in my body or the vaccine? It's about risk management at this point. Do I think I'm really going to outdo this virus, or want to take whatever measure I can take to protect myself? So there was a documentary that is going to be airing on public TV. It may have already done it. I think it was called Vaccinating the Misinformation. And it really did a phenomenal job going through the whole process and all the questions and mistrust of folks with regards to vaccines and how to kind of overcome some of those arguments. But then the group of people that talk about chips and the fact that there's a chip in the body and so forth, you know, while many of us may find that kind of doesn't make sense, but people genuinely believe that stuff. So we have to respect their beliefs and kind of work with that a little bit. What I try to kind of, you know, tell them is, if the conspiracy theory that they're going to control and kill a bunch of us and try to eradicate some race, and I've heard all kinds of stuff with regards to the purpose of the chip, it's the question of, once the chip is in the body, there's no way they would differentiate the friend from foe. If they're going to eradicate, they're going to probably eradicate a bunch of their own people. It just kind of doesn't logically make sense. But usually when we take the combination of the approach of what Dr. Greenberg just shared and what I'm sharing, some combination will convince some people. And I have found quite a few people who simply did not understand or look at the purpose of vaccination in the right way. And those were the very same people that they sat down and they took the shot, but they weren't going to take it when they came in. And then the ones that no matter what you say, there's always some doctors somewhere in Europe, something that said something, and that takes precedent over anything we say here. So we're gonna have to pick our battles here.
Thank you very much.
So I've talked to a lot of our staff, and so I can give you a few reasons, and I'll just list them all. I don't put toxins in my body. We've already talked about that. One person, I don't believe it's against her religion to get vaccinated, but her reason for not getting vaccinated is she has total faith that God will protect her, and she doesn't need the vaccine. Another person says, well, to tell you the truth, I'm afraid of needles, and I've been around COVID so much and have been fine. I don't think I need the vaccine. And then another person, and this is, probably a legitimate reason, I'm allergic to the preservatives in the vaccine, and my doctors told me not to get vaccinated. But a lot of women, their reason is that they are of childbearing age, that they're pregnant or trying to get pregnant or planning to get pregnant in the near future. So very concerned about that, about their fertility and about the protecting the fetus.
So let me try to address those, because it's important to really try to address those. So let me start with the last one, because I can remember that the best, and it's common. No effect on fertility, zero. That's just misinformation started on YouTube. It is a question that I've gotten a lot from DSPs, and I don't know if it's somewhat of a cultural question or, but I have gotten it a lot from direct support professionals. It's circulated. Absolutely no effect on fertility. In terms of being pregnant, all the professional medical organizations, the obstetrical organizations, they all recommend getting the vaccine. Nothing is 100% without risk, but the risk of being pregnant and contracting COVID and what it can do to you and your baby are horrendous. So they absolutely horrendous. So, there's no question that the risk ratio, you want to get the vaccine. And what I tell people is, ask your obstetrician, ask your gynecologist. They will tell you that. With respect to putting toxins in your body, and I don't really say this but let's think about that. I've had that conversation with many DSPs and many of my staff at work. I've had that conversation actually with two nurses that were outside standing having a smoking break, and they're like, well, I don't want to put toxins in my body. I've had that conversations with DSPs when we're sitting around eating McDonald's and fries, them and me. And I'm like, all right, well, let's think about this. So it is not a toxin. There's nothing toxic in it. It's probably one of the safest, most purified, non-toxic thing that you can put in your body. So that's important. And then what were the other, in terms of, I have total faith in God. I'm not going to go there. That's a personal belief, and everybody has to make that decision. And your perspective is different. With respect to, well, I've been around COVID a lot. I can understand that, but what people don't see is they don't do what I do. So they see the people they're around that are kind of okay, and they've been lucky. They don't see the people they've been around that wind up on my ventilators when I have to go out and say, I'm very sorry, but your 35-year-old son just died. So the fact that you've been around something, and the example that I give is, you can drive around with a seatbelt without a seatbelt all the time, and you may get away with it, but when you're in an accident, you're going to be dead. So the fact that you haven't yet gotten sick, I'm grateful for that, but that doesn't really answer. So those are kind of some of the responses to that.
Thank you, Dr. Greenberg. We have a couple more minutes, so I wanted to ask, I'm going to share your email address with people, and please email myself or Dr. Greenberg if you have more questions. If you'd like to set up another Compass Cafe where he comes and Fariborz joins us and answers some more questions, let us know. But I did want to ask if there are upcoming opportunities for people to get their booster, and what, if anything, is PCC doing right now in terms of educating people and opportunities for
So-
boosters.
So as many of you know, I kind of did a lot of work during the initial vaccine stuff. I'm working right now with PCC and just got off several conference calls. So I'm going to give you some information that's kind of hot off the press, but preliminary. We're going to be having a town hall on this is tentative, but it's probably going to be December 2nd at 5 p.m., which we will have a number of different panelists to kind of talk about, address questions. I reached out and spoke with Dr. Bridges, the Montgomery County Chief Public Health Officer or acting. I'm hoping he probably will be on it. And we are going to have a number of other good panelists on there. So that'll be an open town hall. So I'd really love it if all of you could try to be there and if you could spread the word to your other, friends, family. So that's number one. We've also are in the process of setting up several booster clinics. We will probably be having several at local pharmacies that will be kind of set up specifically for individuals and their direct support professional staff who need the booster or the original vaccine if they need it. Those will be done in several different Safeway pharmacies in December. And then we hope to have one at I'm not going to give the name of the service provider because it's still being worked out, but at a service provider in Montgomery County for those individuals and their staff where maybe going to a pharmacy is not directly feasible. I have been able to work it out. The Safeways have been great, and they do understand that there may be individuals that can't wear a mask. They're okay with that. And on a limited basis, if there's an individual that you need to kind of pull up with the van, get a shot and leave, and not come into the store, they'll try to accommodate that. So there'll be more information forthcoming to your leadership. But please, spread the word. And, I think that should be helpful.
Yep, and for those of you who are asking, as soon as we get confirmation and information about the town hall, share that with everyone. All right, thank you so much, Dr. Greenberg. Thank you, Fariborz. Thank you all for being here today. This was wonderful. Great turnout, really good questions.
Thank you all. And again, thank you for what you do.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Dr.
everybody.
You.
All right, take care, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.